Just a preamble to avoid confusion, I'll use the word Africa in this video exclusively in reference to this part of the world. I'll call the continent it's in Ethiopia. Also, Massilia and Massicilia will come up a lot, and they basically mean East and West Numidia. And yeah, that's it. Start the video now. We start our tale in 533 as the Roman Empire in the east marches towards Vandalia. Miraculously, the Vandals defeat the Roman army in the gates of Carthage, forcing Belisarius to board his remaining forces ashore and try to regroup in Sardinia. After a quick capture of it's been a while since I've been here. Whack. After a quick capture of Sardinia and Corsica, Belisarius decided to wait on reinforcements from Cyrenaica, reinforcements which never came. So, after an eternal stalemate, Vandalia and Rome came together to negotiate peace. The following Treaty of Finae imposed several Vandal concessions to Rome. Corsica, Sardinia, and their claims to western Sicily were transferred to Roman hands. The Vandal kingdom itself became a tributary vassal of Justinian, and agreed to pay reparations for the Roman losses in the Carthaginian gates. In return, Rome abandoned its claims to Africa and agreed to protect the Vandal kingdom from any future invasion. So, Vandalia remained alive, a majority Latin African kingdom under a Vandal ruling class, all the way until 660, when it was conquered by the Islamic Caliphate. Much like in Asturias, Arabic control and settlement over the region rapidly dwindled in the mountainous interior, leading to the preservation of African culture and language. Although for now under Arabic rule, these regions became small independent kingdoms following the collapse of the Umayyad Caliphate, the most important of which was the kingdom of Massilia. In 902, following the death of Ibrahim II of the Aghlabid Emirate, Africa was sent into chaos. A Berber raid that almost reached Tunis resulted in the complete loss of Aghlabid control over the southwest, leading to African rebellions all over the mountains. The African kingdom of Ruscade was established in the coast, while Massilia expanded south into Palania. Arabic Sicily, although majority Italian, was conquered by a rogue mercenary army of Afro-Sicilians, leading to the establishment of the Kingdom of Sicily. The following centuries were known as the Southern Reconquista, a period of war between the remaining Muslim, Arabic, and Christian African kingdoms of the eastern Maghreb. By 1103, Massilia was the dominant power in the region, stretching from its eastern Numidian homeland to Tripoli, now known as Leftis. The Sultanate of Tunis remained as the dominant Islamic power, and Massilia's main rival. By 1105, Tunis had the fealty of the remaining emirs of Africa, and felt confident in an assault against the southerners. And so began the Ruscade War, where the Massilian allied Kingdom of Ruscade was invaded by Tunis. The Ruscade army made a stand on the mountainous south, while the Massilians attempted to capture Hadrumetum, now Adrunto. By 1110, the African army was marching onto the city of Tunis, forcing the Arabs to retreat from Ruscade. In the following Battle of Tunis, the Arabs were finally defeated and forced to retreat west, attempting to keep their control of Rakhaya. Tunis was completely sacked and most of the population had no choice but to flee. The recapture of Carthage in 1112 and the following unification of Massilia and Ruscade marked the formation of the Kingdom of Africa, with its capital relocated to the ancient city of Sartajo. This was not, however, the end of the Reconquista. Rakhaya remained an Arabic stronghold in the north, raiding both Africa and Sicily incessantly. The population of the north was also still mostly Arabic, despite the increased settlement, and in 1180, when Sicily became a junior partner of the Kingdom of Africa, the country's Muslim population fled south to Rakhaya. The period between 1112 and 1209 is marked by the attempted reconsolidation of the north, as Muslim rebellions were put down, and attempts at converting the locals to Christianity were rejected. It all changed in 1209 when an African and Sicilian campaign sought to finally destroy the last bastion of Islam in Africa. The campaign in Rakhaya was a success. The city was conquered, the northern border secured, and few casualties were endured by the African powers. As the Reconquista reached its dusk, the Christian kingdom sought more drastic measures to convert their north. In 1223, the African Inquisition saw the death of thousands of Muslims in Tunisia, and the displacement of hundreds of thousands. Not only Muslims were targeted, but also Jews, Arians, the Orthodox, and any other form of heresy to Catholic doctrine. The Inquisition was also very long-lived, only ending in the early 1700s. After the fall of Rakhaya, Africa was once again focused on consolidating its own internal affairs. Inquisition, urbanization, reconstruction, and defending their existing territory were the primary goal of the fledgling state, with large-scale wars of conquest being undesired. Some small-scale military expeditions were commanded, such as the conquest of Nazla and Malta, but the bulk of the African army was stationed in Massilia, prepared to counter any advance by their hostile Maghrebi neighbors. Arabic and Berber pirates from the Maghreb regularly raided the coasts of Africa and Europe, mostly from Morocco, Algiers, and Tlemcen. But after Morocco marched east in the 15th century and established an empire in the Maghreb, the raid became no longer acceptable. So, in 1489, after the fall of Granada to the crown of Spain, an alliance between the Reconquista states of Castile, Aragon, and Africa declared war on Morocco. The Moroccan War was an unprecedentedly short campaign. After some early victories in Mazasilia, the Moroccan resistance in the Atlas Mountains completely collapsed. The Africans then rapidly marched west, seizing all important cities in Algeria in less than a year. Only Tlemcen put up a fight, and it was ultimately in vain. Spain was having some more difficulties, as the siege of Tangier had dragged on for longer than expected. But by the time the African army had reached Fez, Spain had taken most of Morocco's Atlantic ports. By 1491, only 2 years after the start of the war, Marrakesh had fallen, and with it the Moroccan Empire. Initially, the Catholic powers' hope was to split the kingdom in twain, Sicilia being annexed by Africa and Morocco proper by Spain. But with most of Morocco occupied by Africa and Spain only holding some ports, the two kingdoms reached a compromise. Africa was granted all of Morocco, including the ports under Spain. They would also be granted a free access through the Straits of Gibraltar, opening an avenue for transatlantic exploration. In return, Africa gave Spain free access to all the ports of the former Moroccan Empire, and more importantly, the island of Sicily. To secure their ability to explore the New World, Africa also participated in the Treaty of Tordesillas, guaranteeing that any land north of Senegal was also to be claimed by Africa, not Portugal. Following the news of the discovery of Hispaniola, Africa immediately began sending expeditions. By 1498, 2 years before the Portuguese explorer Pedro Álvares Cabral, Africa had reached South America. But in 1500, the Portuguese had also discovered the territory, which was theoretically within their domain. Arguing their early discovery, Africa also laid claim to the territory, and this eventually resulted in war. The Alagoas War was a transatlantic conflict between the Crown of Africa and the Crown of Portugal. It began in 1531 following a dispute over the Portuguese colony Alagoas that sat between the African settlements of Salvador and Recife. It quickly spilled over to Guinea when fighting broke out in the African-backed Wolof Kingdom and over control of Trasra. By 1535, Africa was forced to retreat from Wolof, but Portugal was kicked out of Alagoas. In the Treaty of Beja that followed, the territory in the Americas east of the Tordesillas line was split between Portugal and Africa. Later treaties with Spain also better defined the colony's northern frontier as the Amazon River. Santa Cruz and its sugarcane industry brought enormous wealth back to Africa. Due to its soil, the colony became the capital of the transatlantic slave trade. Santa Cruz and its southern Portuguese neighbor of Brazil together became the destination of some 40% of all slaves headed towards the New World. Until 1640, Santa Cruz held an undisputed monopoly on New World sugar, and when the sugarcane industry collapsed due to competition from the Caribbean, the colony had to completely reorganize its economy or face financial ruin. By 1660, the government of Santa Cruz began to invest their sugarcane wealth into the promotion of other economic activities, such as mining and meat production. Sugar was still an important local industry, but no longer the backbone of the whole economy. The switch also kept the colony profitable, as Africa was of course in control of the Santa Cruzian meat industry. But even so, Africa as a whole was on the decline. Their wealth gradually dwindled through the 17th and 18th century, and their lack of domestic coal made industrialization come late. In 1701, the War of Spanish Succession broke out in Europe. France fought against almost all her neighbors over control of the inherited Spanish crown, eventually surrendering her claims over the south. Although long-standing allies of the Spanish, Africa sided with Portugal and Britain against French hegemon over the continent. Fighting in the Americas led to the capture of Puerto Rico, and a joint Milanese-African offensive in Italy saw the capture of Naples. When peace came in 1714, Africa was permitted to keep the territories they gained. Efforts to reclaim the desert and make the interior into usable farmlands in the late 18th century gave Africa a major boost, and led to the founding of larger population centers near the mountains, such as Zama and Soufrish. The discovery of diamonds and iron in Morocco led to the jumpstart of the African industrialization, and an overall revitalization of the African economy. As the century came to a close and revolution sprung in France, the dawn of a new age came to Africa. The end of the French Revolution and the start of the Napoleonic Wars see complete French hegemony over mainland Europe, and the seemingly unstoppable French Empire wishes to expand further. In 1803, Napoleon invaded Naples, dragging Africa to war once more. Although their heartland was protected by the combined naval efforts of Britain and the Marina Africana, undefended Sicily and Sardinia stood no chance against the French. Moreover, a French-backed rebellion in Santa Cruz saw the entire colony occupied by revolutionaries. No longer capable of controlling the territory, Africa reluctantly accepted Santa Cruzian independence and redirected their garrison back to the front lines in Europe. As the war continued and France's resources were slowly drained, Africa was slowly able to reclaim southern Italy. When peace came in 1814, Naples once again was in their hands. In order to supply their growing industry, the kingdom cut down on Morocco's financial independence, essentially making them a colony. The new Sicilia territory was immediately plagued with unrest, as the local population heavily protested the new measures. By this point, there was still a significant Muslim population in Sicilia as well, for which life under the new administration became significantly harder. Mosques saw their taxes go up, and speaking Arabic in public was heavily restricted. Missionary work was established in schools, and general discrimination against Sicilians became much more widespread. As a result of the unrest in Sicilia, a constant military presence had to be established to protect the economic centers of the territory. This loosened their control over Naples, and so in 1862 the Kingdom of Italy, recently united with Savoy, led a charge south. The Italo-African War was a massive victory for Italy, seeing not only Naples but Sicily and Sardinia annexed. A large quantity of Afro-Sicilians fled back to Africa, mainly resettling in Sartago and Culipa. Only 8 years later, Italy marched on Rome and reunited the entire peninsula. In 1884, the Berlin Conference was called by the German Empire, an attempt to split the Ethiopian conflict to avoid needless war. The following scramble for Ethiopia saw a massive expansion by the French and British empires, and much of France's ambition collided with Africa's. After the Dakar incident almost brought the two to war, cooler heads prevailed and Africa agreed to withdraw from all lands south of Trasra. In return, France acknowledged Africa's claims to Timbuktu, essentially creating a straight line across the Sahel dividing Africa and France's colonial territory. In the west, the largely neglected colony of Puerto Rico was sold to the United States. Despite abandoning their claims over Guinea, Africa's colonial ambitions were not quite over. The Ottoman province of Tripolitania was craved by African leadership, and relations with the Ottoman Empire soured deeply. This rivalry became important several decades later, when the Ottomans and British went to war. In November 20th, 1914, following a British promise to recognize their rule over Tripolitania, Africa entered the Great War. Africans were soon sent to the front lines in France, and an expedition east was immediately organized. By February, Tripoli had fallen and African troops were marching towards Benghazi. All of Cyrenaica was under African control before the end of 1915, and when the British and French troops began an assault on Ottoman Arabia, African troops were sent there as well. Their distance from the front lines meant that Africa proper was never really under threat of invasion or heavy bombing, and so it left the war almost completely unscathed. By September 1918, peace had come to Europe once more. Most of Europe lay devastated, leaving Africa in the unique position of being one of the few nations in the Mediterranean not ravaged by conflict. And yet, even this victory was not enough to drown the country's boiling tensions. Sicilia remained a constant thorn on the kingdom's back. The newly incorporated Tripolitania was unhappy with their new Catholic government, Trasra and Timbuktu were increasingly demanding rights and representation, and the ideals of democracy, liberalism, and socialism were becoming increasingly popular. In 1932, a coup d'etat inspired by the turmoil in the neighboring Spain led to the establishment of the African Republic. Although the swift uprising prevented an immediate civil war, political tensions became even more pronounced following the coup. By 1938, Sicilian riots and a parliamentary crisis led to all-out war. The African Civil War was fought between the right-wing coalition of the African Royal Restoration Front and the left liberal coalition government of the Republic. The war dragged on all the way until 1942, ending when Italy and Germany intervened on the monarchist side, and the capture of Sartago led to the establishment of an Italian puppet state. The Republican army fled to Sicilia, engaging in guerrilla warfare against the Afro-Italian government for most of the rest of the war, much like the partisans in Yugoslavia. By 1943, the British and American troops liberated Tangier, and with their support, the Republicans re-entered Sartago in July. In August, African troops fought in Sicily, and by September, they had crossed Messina into the peninsula. The war finally ends in 1945, and once again a new age dawns. Africa temporarily occupied southern Italy for reparations, but their control over the Sahara had essentially already ended. The rebel states of the Republic of Trasra and the state of Touarism occupied their southern colonies, and little ability or support from a southern campaign, combined with American threats of denying Marshall Plan aid, led to the African Parliament officially recognizing southern independence. The success of the sovereign rebellions only led to more separatist unrest, as Massicilia demanded its independence from Africa. With no international support, the Africans were once again forced to concede. The subsequent Massilian Autonomy Act of 1968 resulted in the breakup of the African Empire and the creation of the North Ethiopian Economic Community, NEEC. Tripolitania, now the Republic of Libya, and Massicilia became sovereign states in a free trade agreement with Africa. Later on, Trasra, Senegal, and Touarism also joined the NWC. The formation of a free trade agreement in North Ethiopia inspired and popularized the movement for European integration, and in 1989 the European Economic Community was reorganized as a European Union. Africa, after some negotiation, ended up in a similar position to Norway, joining the EFTA and becoming not a core member of the EU, but still economically adjacent. Like most EFTA members, Africa rejected the euro in favor of their own domestic currency, the African shekel. And really, this is where our story ends, with Africa now as a modern Mediterranean state. Strong ties to Spain, Italy, and Massicilia, member of NATO, mostly Catholic. Now excuse me as I get this Roman taste of my mouth by drawing a bunch of maps about a surviving Phoenician Carthage. Peace.